Hello students, today let's start our listening class and our first topic is summary completion. I hope you all understood and studied about reading and its 12 question types. Please do study and practice properly in order to get a 7 plus band. So now let's go to our topic. As you can see here, there will be a paragraph which is a summary of information regarding a particular portion of our listening audio, and what we have to do is that we have to fill in these blanks with the appropriate words which we hear. It's really very simple, right? So I want all of you to get maximum mark in summary completion. Now I will tell you what are the steps we should follow while doing listening questions. We will get around 25 to 30 seconds to read each section of listening, and we will make maximum advantage of that time. At first we will read the instruction and we will notice what is the word limit in it, and always make sure that you won't go over the word limit, and if you are going over the word limit then your answer will be marked incorrect. Our next step is read and understand the question. Get an overall idea about what we are going to listen and what is in the passage given. And along with this reading, we can also predict the answers which we are going to hear, like whether it's a verb, a date, a place which we want to fill. So always do these steps before you are listening the audio. Summary completion. When you get to university or start working, two of the skills you will have to use are summarizing and paraphrasing. These skills are tested in summary completion questions. You will be given a list of sentences that summarize the clip you will hear. As we already saw, there will be a list of sentences which is a short summary of information which you are going to listen. So, filling in that blanks with appropriate words is our duty. The text will be a paraphrase of the recording. So, what is that? We should not always concentrate on the words from the question paper. It's because most probably to a large extent always the synonyms of the words in the question paper or the paraphrase sentences will be what we are going to hear. So be careful with the meaning and what we are listening. They have also summarized the recording. We won't get each and every word what we are listening in our question booklet. A summary of information what we are listening will be in our question paper. You should be able to read the text before listening and know what you're going to hear. You should use your time wisely and properly. You will get around 25 to 30 seconds in order to read the question booklet in each part. So, use that time to read the question paper. If and only if you recognize and you understand what you're going to hear, then only we can concentrate in our listening audio properly. Now let's talk about word count. Here, as you can see in the slide, I give you an example, 2 words and or a number. Let's discuss the category coming under that. If the instruction is given 2 words and or a number, we can write either one word, the answer can be one word, or we can write 2 words, or we can write 1 word and a number, or 2 words and a number, and we can write a number itself. You guys just pause the video and properly understand what's given here. Strategy for summary completion. Read the instructions carefully and note the word limit. As I'm always insisting you, read the instruction and then do your questions. Read the sentences and understand the general meaning. Predict what you will hear. Think about how the sentences can be changed through paraphrasing. Look at the gaps and predict what the answer will be. Listen and fill in the gaps with the correct answers. And always make sure that your sentence is grammatically correct. And if it's not grammatically correct, it's sure that your answer is wrong. Hooray! We just reached our practice section. Now I will give you 30 seconds and our question will be displayed here, and after 30 seconds, our audio related to this will be played and you have to fill in the blanks.
I want to tell you a story about stories. And I want to tell you this story because I think we need to remember that sometimes the stories we tell each other are more than just tales or entertainment or narratives. They're also vehicles for sowing inspiration and ideas across our societies and across time. The story I'm about to tell you is about how one of the most advanced technological achievements of the modern era has its roots in stories, and how some of the most important transformations yet to come might also. The story begins over 300 years ago when Galileo Galilei first learned of the recent Dutch invention that took two pieces of shaped glass and put them in a long tube, and thereby extended human sight farther than ever before. When Galileo turned his new telescope to the heavens, and to the moon in particular, he discovered something incredible. These are pages from Galileo's book Sidereus Nuncius, published in 1610. And in them he revealed to the world what he had discovered. And what he discovered was that the moon was not just a celestial object wandering across the night sky, but rather it was a world with high sunlit mountains and dark mare, the Latin word for seas. And once this new world in the moon had been discovered, well, people immediately began to think about how to travel there. And just as importantly, they began to write stories about how that might happen and what those voyages might be like. One of the first people to do so was actually the Bishop of Hereford, a man named Francis Godwin. And Godwin wrote a story about a Spanish explorer, Domingo Gonzalez, who ended up marooned on the island of St. Helena in the middle of the Atlantic, and there, in an effort to get home, developed a machine, an invention, to harness the power of the local wild geese to allow him to fly, and eventually to embark on a voyage to the moon. Godwin's book, The Man on the Moon, or A Discourse of a Voyage Thither, was only published posthumously and anonymously in 1638, likely on account of the number of controversial ideas that it contained, including an endorsement of the Copernican view of the universe that put the sun at the center of the solar system, as well as a pre-Newtonian concept of gravity that had the idea that the weight of an object would decrease with increasing distance from Earth. And that's to say nothing of his idea of a goose machine that could go to the moon. And while this idea of a voyage to the moon by goose machine might not seem particularly insightful or technically creative to us today, what's important is that Godwin described getting to the moon not by a dream or by magic, as Johannes Kepler had written about, but rather through human invention. And it was this idea that we could build machines that could travel into the heavens, that would plant its seed in minds across the generations. The idea was next taken up by his contemporary, John Wilkins, then just a young student at Oxford, but later one of the founders of the Royal Society. And John Wilkins took the idea of space travel in Godwin's text seriously and wrote not just another story, but a non-fiction philosophical treatise entitled Discovery of the New World in the Moon, or a discourse tending to prove that 'tis probable there may be another habitable world in that planet. And note, by the way, that word habitable. That idea in itself would have been a powerful incentive for people thinking about how to build machines that could go there. In his book, Wilkins seriously considered a number of technical methods for spaceflight, and it remains to this day the earliest known non-fiction account of how we might travel to the moon. Other stories would soon follow, most notably by Cyrano de Bergerac with his Lunar Tales. And by the mid-17th century, the idea of people building machines that could travel into the heavens was growing in complexity and technical nuance. And yet, in the late 17th century, this intellectual progress effectively ceased. People still told stories about getting to the moon, but they relied on the old ideas, or once again, on dreams or on magic. Why? Well, because the discovery of the laws of gravity by Newton and the invention of the vacuum pump by Robert Hooke and Robert Boyle meant that people now understood that a condition of vacuum existed between the planets and consequentially between the Earth and the moon. And they had no way of overcoming this, no way of thinking about overcoming this. And so, for well over a century, the idea of a voyage to the moon made very little intellectual progress until the rise of the Industrial Revolution and the development of steam engines and boilers, and most importantly, pressure vessels. And these gave people the tools to think about how they could build a capsule that could resist the vacuum of space. And so it was in this context, in 1835, that the next great story of spaceflight was written by Edgar Allan Poe. Now, today we think of Poe in terms of Gothic poems and telltale hearts and ravens, but he considered himself a technical thinker. He grew up in Baltimore, the first American city with gas street lighting, and he was fascinated by the technological revolution that he saw going on all around him. He considered his own greatest work not to be one of his Gothic tales, but rather his epic prose poem Eureka, in which he expounded his own personal view of the cosmographical nature of the universe. And in his stories, he would describe in fantastical technical detail machines and contraptions. And nowhere was he more influential in this than in his short story, The Unparalleled Adventures of One Hans Pfaall. It's a story of an unemployed bellows maker in Rotterdam who, depressed and tired of life, this is Poe after all, and deeply in debt, he decides to build a hermetically enclosed balloon-borne carriage that is launched into the air by dynamite and from there floats through the vacuum of space all the way to the lunar surface. And importantly, he did not develop this story alone. For in the appendix to his tale, he explicitly acknowledged Godwin's A Man on the Moon from over 200 years earlier as an influence, calling it a singular and somewhat ingenious little book. And although this idea of a balloon-borne voyage to the moon may seem not much more technically sophisticated than the goose machine, in fact, Poe was sufficiently detailed in the description of the construction of the device and in terms of the orbital dynamics of the voyage that it could be diagrammed in the very first spaceflight encyclopedia as a mission in 1920s. And it was this attention to detail, or to verisimilitude, as he called it, that would influence the next great story. Jules Verne's From the Earth to the Moon, written in 1865. And it's a story that has a remarkable legacy and a remarkable similarity to the real voyages to the moon that would take place over 100 years later. Because in this story, the first voyage to the moon takes place from Florida with 3 people on board in a trip that takes 3 days. Exactly the parameters that would prevail during the Apollo program itself. And in an explicit tribute to Poe's influence on him, Verne situated the group responsible for this feat in the book in Baltimore, at the Baltimore Gun Club, with its members shouting cheers for Edgar Poe as they begin to lay out their plans for the conquest of the moon. And just as Verne was influenced by Poe, so too would Verne's own story go on to influence and inspire the first generation of rocket scientists. The 2 great pioneers of liquid fuel rocketry in Russia and in Germany, Konstantin Tsiolkovsky and Hermann Oberth, both traced their own commitment to the field of spaceflight to their reading From the Earth to the Moon as teenagers, and then subsequently committing themselves to trying to make that story a reality.
I came to talk about first principles and communities that I love, especially East Palo Alto, California, which is full of amazing people. It's also a community that's oddly separated by the 101 freeway that runs through Silicon Valley. On the west side of the freeway in Palo Alto are the haves, on just about any dimension you think of: education, income, access to water. On the east side of the freeway are the have-nots. And even if you don't know East Palo Alto, you might know this story of East Side disparity, whether it's the separation of the railroad tracks in East Pittsburgh, or the Grosse Pointe Gate in East Detroit, or East St. Louis, or East Oakland, East Philly. Why is it that communities on the social, economic, and environmental margin, they tend to be on the east sides of places? Turns out it's the wind. If you look at the Earth from the North Pole, you'd see that it rotates counterclockwise. And the impact of this is that the wind in the northern and the southern hemispheres blow in the same direction as the rotation of the Earth, to the east. So the way to think about this is, imagine you're sitting around a campfire. You got to seat 10 people. You got to keep everyone warm. The question is, who sits with the smoky wind blowing in their face? And the answer is, people with less power. This campfire dynamic is what's playing out in cities, not just in the US, but all around the world. East London, the east side of Paris is this way, East Jerusalem. Even down the street from where we're sitting right now, that marginalized community is East Vancouver. Now, I'm not the only one to notice this. I nerded on this hard for years, and I finally found a group of economic historians in the UK who modeled industrial-era smokestack dispersion. And they came to the same conclusion mathematically that I'd come to as an anthropologist, which is wind and pollution were driving marginalized communities to the east. The dominant logic of the industrial era is about disparity. It's about haves and have-nots, and that's become part of our culture. That's why you know exactly what I'm talking about if I tell you someone's from the wrong side of the tracks. That phrase comes from the direction that wind would blow dirty train smoke, to the east, usually. I'm not saying every single community in the east is on the margin or every community on the margin is in the east, but I'm trying to make a bigger point about disparity by design. So if you find yourself talking about any cardinal direction or a freeway, a river, some train tracks, you're talking about an east side community. Now, the wind is obviously a natural phenomenon, but the human design decisions that we make to separate ourselves is not natural. Consider the fact that every east side community in the United States was built during the era of legal segregation. We clearly weren't even trying to design for the benefit of everyone. So we ended up dealing with issues like redlining. So this is where the government literally created maps to tell bankers where they shouldn't lend. These are some of those actual maps. And you'll notice how the red tends to be clustered on the east sides of these cities. Those financial design decisions became a self-fulfilling prophecy. So no loans turned into low property tax base, and that bled into worse schools and a less well-prepared workforce. And lo and behold, lower incomes, it means you can't qualify for a loan. It's just a vicious downward spiral. And that's just the case with lending. We've made similarly sinister design decisions on any number of issues, from water infrastructure to where we decided to place grocery stores versus liquor stores, or even for whom and how we design and fund technology products. Collectively, this list of harms is the artifact of our more primitive selves. I don't think this is how we'd want to be remembered, but this is basically what we've been doing to East Side communities for the last century. The good news is it doesn't have to be this way. We got ourselves into this East Side dilemma through bad design, and so we can get out of it with good design. And I believe the first principle of good design is actually really simple. We have to start with the commitment to design for the benefit of everyone. So remember the campfire metaphor. If we want to benefit everyone, maybe we just sit in a horseshoe so nobody gets the smoke in their face.
It's all about this module, guys. You guys have to practice well and be perfect.